Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a blustery, chilly Thursday morning here in suburban Chicago. I'm on a break between a couple classes, and I thought I would take a quick stroll and record an episode for you. It's, I normally record on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays when I feel like it. And I recorded an episode yesterday, which has been consigned to the dustbin of history, because it turned out I'd already recorded that episode. Oh, I'm so mad at myself. So I was getting ready to record the episode I was doing today, and then I decided I would expand it into talking about more stuff. And in doing so, I ended up just re-recording a previous episode. Today's episode is going to be about the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective games, the 4 different box sets, what I remember about them, what makes each one special, why you would want to pick one over the other to play. I'm doing this at the suggestion of listener Lance Coffey, who asked about that. So that's what we're doing today. In preparing to do that, I was like, maybe I should talk about other mystery games as well. And I spent a whole episode talking about the other mystery games I'd played and why you might want to think about exploring those. As I was finishing, there was something in the back of my head that said, man, this feels a little familiar. So I got back to my computer and I went on the convenient search tool over at rattleboxgames.com and I searched mystery games, and I found that Pick Up and Deliver episode 244, so not even that long ago, a couple months, was called Mystery Games, and I talked about all these different mystery games. Duh! So I deleted the one I did yesterday, and it's possible that today's episode on a Venn diagram of game content will overlap in some significant way with that episode, because I did not, as a responsible podcaster would do, go back and listen to the episode. I did not do that. I just plowed ahead with the original plan of talking about the 4 Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective box sets. That said, I'm pretty sure I didn't talk about them in that much detail because I was talking about all these other games too. So that's the excuse I'm going to hang my hat on here. As a brief reminder, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is my favorite detective mystery game. It has been published, it was published originally in the early 1980s, and several expansions were published along with it. It was slowly reprinted a couple times in the mid-90s, and then it drifted out of print and was missing for a long time. It got a resurgence of attention thanks to Shut Up and Sit Down, which is what led me to buy it. And then it got a reprint from Space Cowboys in maybe 2015. Since then, they have reprinted 2 of the expansions as well, and then done 1 new box of entirely new content, which just came out this year. So there are 4 boxes. The game is a mystery-solving game that runs entirely through storytelling by reading out of a book. In the game, you get a rule book, which has a list of reliable contacts. You get a map of London. You get a directory, which shows you kind of like a phone book. You get newspapers, 1 newspaper for each day in which the case you're doing is meant to start. And those cases are all generally clumped together time-wise. So the second newspaper is maybe a week after the first one or something like that. And then you get a case book for each case. In the new editions, the answers for the mystery are printed in the back of the case book, or the questions for the mystery are printed in the back of the case book upside down, so it's hard to accidentally read them. And the answers are on a separate sheet of paper inside an envelope attached to the back of the case book. You also have an explanation of the end of the story, which is also in the back of the case book upside down. So it's hard to accidentally read it. As opposed to in the original game, the answers were just in the next section of the casebook in the back, so you could accidentally kind of flip to them. The way you play is that you start out by reading a story prompt that tells you what mystery you're encountering. In the narrative, you are part of the Baker Street Irregulars, Sherlock Holmes' group of homeless children who he has trained in some of the arts of mystery solving, and then you are working to solve these mysteries alongside Sherlock. He solves them all too, but your goal is to solve them as quickly as you can and try to then compare the speed that you solve them to the speed that he solved them. The game is played by visiting locations around London using the map, the newspaper, the directory, and things you hear from other suspects to find which locations you want to visit. Then when you visit, you flip to that address in the book, you read the entry in the book, and then you go to the next one. You write down each location that you visit, and at the end of the game, when you decide you're done, you proceed to the end of the game where it asks you several questions. You answer them as best you can, and you get points based on what questions you got right. You then lose points for every location that you went to that Sherlock Holmes didn't. So if Sherlock Holmes went to 5 locations and you went to 15, you would be penalized for 10 locations, which is 50 points. It's not uncommon when we play to take a penalty of 50 points. That's pretty standard for us. The mysteries feel a lot like real Sherlock Holmes mysteries, both in the way that they're written, the kinds of stories they tell, and in the solutions. And that last part, what I mean is, often the solutions feel like a real stretch of logic is drawn, and Holmes solves them with a supernatural ability to anticipate where he needs to go and what information he needs to get. It feels a little cheap sometimes, but usually it makes sense. And you got to remember, Sherlock Holmes is supposed to be the smartest detective in the history of the world. So of course he's going to solve it quickly. And anyone who resents that he could solve it that quickly has misunderstood the central purpose of the game, which is, of course, he's going to solve it ridiculously fast. That's the whole idea. The idea is, how long does it take you to solve it and how many points can you get in comparison? It's sort of like people who complain about how quickly Sherlock solves the case feel to me like like you play some sort of sprinting game, and then at the end they rate your score versus Usain Bolt. And then people are like, well, Usain Bolt, no fair, he runs too fast. Yeah, he's Usain Bolt. That's when people complain about Sherlock Holmes, that's what I hear them saying. So that's kind of where I am on that. So let's talk about the 4 box sets. The 4 box sets are in order of publication or order of reprint. They're all called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, and then they have a subtitle. The Thames Murders and Other Cases, Jack the Ripper and West End Cases, Carlton House and Queen's Park, and the Baker Street Irregulars. Color-wise, they are brown, red, blue, and green. All 4 boxes are great, I will say. Each one has a slightly different approach and a slightly different set of things that you're doing. So what I'll talk about now is I'm going to talk about all 4 in order, talk about who I think is best, who's the best audience for the game, and so on. So the Thames Murders and Other Cases is the original box set. It is the starting point for a lot of people to play. It was the first reprint. It is excellent. I think if you're looking for, you just want to play one of these, that's the one to get. The cases are pretty hard. And most importantly, there are some really bad typos. They're not as bad as in the version I have, which is the old 1980s version that was reprinted in the mid-90s. I have the mid-90s reprint, but which has some atrocious game-breaking typos. But the Space Cowboys edition does also have some typos. So the best way to approach that, I would say, is either get a friend who's not going to play it to do it for you, if you have a friend who would do that, or do it early on and then put it away for a while. You need to go through and update the map. I think there's some missing stuff on the map maybe. And then there's a couple crucial typos in like the phone book or in some of the case books. So it's really important that you adjust those so that you can enjoy the cases really well. Because it's very frustrating to spend a lot of time pursuing a lead that doesn't exist because there's a thing missing in the game. But I realize I'm here talking about all the bad things about this. This is an excellent set. The mysteries are nice and varied. They have a lot of different kinds of solutions. They're extremely satisfying, but also very frustrating. You really get the feeling of Sherlock being incredibly smart. It's also the simplest game rules-wise. The only rule you have to deal with is you go to a location, you count how many locations you've gone to. The map and the phone book and the newspapers all work like they should. The one thing I would caution, I've heard a number of people comment on the idea that they didn't know the newspapers all apply. So keep that in mind, that as you're going through, you can use any newspaper that is at or before the date of the case you're on. And some of them it really does matter. So That's a really good one. I think this is an event game. You can usually play it of an evening. It usually takes us about 90 minutes to play. So you sit down with a couple beverages and probably 2 or 3 people. I find it is not as fun with more people, but 2 or 3, it's an excellent game. I guess you could play it by yourself. I like to have someone to bounce ideas off of, but then again, I've never had the opportunity to play it myself because I've always played it in groups. So I think it's not as fun with 4. It's still fun, but I think 3 or 2 are really the ideal numbers for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. So that's the base game, Thames Murders and Other Cases. I would recommend that as the starting place, probably, though I'll offer one caveat. Come back around to me for the Baker Street ones. So the second box is Jack the Ripper and West End Stories. This is the red box. This was my least favorite of the collection. The first 5 cases of this one involve you and Holmes helping the police in their inquiries into the Jack the Ripper murders. For fans of true crime, or people who are fans of true crime, I hope you understand that phrase means people who are interested in true crime stories, or people who have paid attention or are interested in the famous Jack the Ripper serial killings that happened in London in the 1880s or 1890s. This set of cases might be really exciting because they are built on the real story. And in these cases, you're not catching somebody, you're helping the police do a couple sort of minor bits of investigation to help the solution. So one of the things I like about these 5 cases is that they don't overwrite or undermine the real events that happened. They're all built around the real events and they add to them. It works really well, and they're really solid. They're great Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective mysteries. They're really good. However, they're gross and gory and real world, and not to my taste. I am very interested in true crime podcasts, for instance, and I do occasionally watch a true crime documentary, but I am not very interested in true crime games. I don't want to get involved in a murder of a real person. And for me, these just felt too real and frankly too graphic. They are much more graphic than the previous ones. There are a few pictures in there, but there's also intense descriptions of the kinds of things that happened in the Ripper murders, which isn't surprising, but still a little more disturbing than the taste. Mechanically, I don't recall there being anything different. I think it works pretty much the same as the first box set, except that you have a different goal in solving the mystery usually. You're solving a part of the mystery in the second part. So the other element that works there, the other 5 cases feel very much like the ones from the Thames murders that you have. The other 5 cases are just regular cases that you solve. In fact, when we played it, we did those first, and then we went back and did the Jack the Ripper ones last because those were less exciting to us. And frankly, they're gross. So that's my least favorite, is the Jack the Ripper ones. It's still very good, but probably best for people who are really interested in true crime and or people more mature. Not a box set for kids. So the third one is the Carlton House and Queen's Park. This collection introduces a new mechanism or a new location, and that's the Carlton House. Carlton House is a large manor with a double-sided map that shows a couple dozen rooms in which some of the events happen. So this allows the designers to tell a couple different stories that engage with the kind of locked room mystery. They allow you to go inside and talk to different people. Narratively, it's not as strong because the idea that you'd only find a person in the room they're staying in or whatever. I recall us having a number of problems sometimes with finding people because we couldn't get our head around the logic of where they're supposed to be and how you're supposed to know where they're supposed to be. I remember the mysteries were pretty good, and I really do like the difference in having this alternate map that you can investigate, particularly because you are allowed to go outside the house too in some of the cases. Some of the cases you have the whole city, but then you also have inside this manor house to investigate. So all in all, the Carlton House and Queen's Park is definitely a good system. Also, there weren't as many typos or the problems of the original reprint have been solved at this point, and so on the last 2 sets especially, I don't recall there being any issues where we had to go to Board Game Geek and look for problems. But I would still recommend it, actually. The green box, as far as I know, doesn't have any typos but all the other ones, it's probably worth looking. I may be remembering with rose-colored glasses because I did these years ago. But Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Carlton House is very good. That said, I would put it third in terms of the order, which leads me to the fourth box and my second favorite, the Baker Street Irregulars. Now, this is a new collection created by Dave Neal, and as far as I could tell, without any input from the original creators of the game. All the other expansions were created originally when the first print came out in the 80s, and then revised and updated by Space Cowboys. This new collection was created by Dave Neal and has its own pedigree. From a level of coherence, I think these mysteries are perhaps the best. They might even exceed the original box set. They're very tightly crafted, really interesting through lines, good characterization, and so on. Really good writing. They feel like they fit the stories very well. I do have a couple complaints though. One, a couple of them introduce new mechanisms, particularly the mechanism of the underground or the train systems, which are supposed to allow you to go visit other places and do things. And we had a lot of trouble getting our head around how that worked and using it properly. So we had a couple mysteries where they were really kind of befuddled by that. And then actually a bigger issue for us, the Baker Street Irregular set has at least a couple places where there's an ad in the newspaper for a business. I hope I'm not spoiling anything here. There's an ad in the newspaper for a business that really has nothing to do with the case. It's just an ad for a business. But during the course of the case, you will need a business, and the ad in the newspaper turns out to be a good lead toward that business. And here's the part I don't like. Sometimes that business is not also in the phone book, or it's one of several businesses of its type in the phone book, and there's nothing in the game to tell you this is the one you should go to versus those others, except that it's in the newspaper. But within the newspaper, there's nothing telling you this is the one you should explore. It's a strange choice and not my favorite because it demands that, or it suggests that you should follow leads in the newspaper without a clear logical reason. Now, it's possible that there is a logical reason that I missed. I know, like, one of the businesses I know is the closest of that kind to the place that we've been investigating. But there are others where there's something in the newspaper that isn't in the phone book. We have had more than one case where the phone book was inadequate in this one. And so I really would have liked to see the phone book be a bit more robust in this case over the previous phone books. I don't recall having this problem before where it feels like we should be able to find a person and we can't, and they're just not in the phone book. It's a minor complaint, and probably a significant portion of it stems from the fact that in the last year, really it's the green box, the Baker Street Irregular cases that I've played, so these problems are most fresh. That said, I've really enjoyed the mysteries. They're not all murders, which is nice. There's a variety of consideration of the fact that we are the Baker Street Irregulars, not just rando detectives. And so it's an excellent box set, and I would say the second best. Now, the caveat of where to start. The one thing I would say about the Baker Street Irregulars is that it is designed to be an introductory box set. Some of the cases are slightly easier, particularly the early ones. And the first case is actually designed to introduce you to all the regulars that you will then encounter throughout the whole series. So if you think that this game sounds like something where you don't just want to try a couple, but you want to play 40 adventures, it might be worth your while to look at getting the Baker Street Irregular box set as your first one instead of getting Thames Murders and Other Cases, just because it is meant to be introductory and to be a good access point. And frankly, it doesn't have the typos. So that would be my caveat for getting that one. Now, if you're interested in trying the game, there is a sample case available on the Space Cowboys website. You can download all the materials you need onto PDFs, and you can try out one of the mysteries. I think it's the third mystery from the original box set. And they don't go in order necessarily. So definitely worth trying out if you think this would be for you. You also could look on the secondary market. People who aren't precious about keeping their games would likely have copies of this for sale once they finish them. So that is my survey of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the 4 different box sets released by Space Cowboys. I'm curious what your thoughts on this series are. Have you played any of them? What did you think? How do they compare to the other detective games? Let me know over on Board Game Geek and Guild 3269, or pop me an email, brendan@rattleboxgames.com. I'm also always interested to hear ideas you have for shows, questions you have for me, and so on. It's great to get some ideas. I try not to do too many review shows. I feel like that's a well-trod space, and so hearing other things from me seems like it's worth your time. So I'm always keen to hear what other things you might want to know. So that's about it for me today. Thanks for joining me. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.